Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I've got one for the real sickos, because today we're doing a Jack of all trades achievement build guide for Honor Mode. The Jack of all trades achievement is a really fascinating one. It requires you to take one level of every class, all 12 classes, levels 1 to 12, without respecking with withers. So you have to start at level 1 and take one level of every class up until the point where you hit level 12. Now there's ways to cheese this achievement. You can hire a hireling and level them up from level 1 to 12 at the end of the game and you'll get the achievement, but what fun is that? This is a build guide for the people who want the ultimate challenge. Taking this incredibly restricted character and playing through the hardest mode in the game will really test your skill, and the build guide that I've got for you will give you the tools to do that. This character obviously is not going to be winning any damage awards or having the best spell access or anything like that. This is not. I'm never going to lie to you and say that this is an incredibly optimized build. But given the incredible restriction that we're laboring under in terms of building the character, remember we're taking one level of every class, and when I tried to build the worst possible character, that was a lot of people's suggestion for how to go about doing it. We end up with a character that is surprisingly quite strong. We provide decent utility to the party in the form of out-of-combat skills and in-combat utility magic. We have surprisingly adequate spell access, are a decent tank, and can contribute in combat in some pretty reasonable ways. You will definitely not be soloing the game with this character, but as a party support character, this one actually provides a pretty reasonable amount of strength to a party, and will be more than capable of getting through Honor Mode. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Pimps Up for the $10 donation, Dalton Jenkins for the $5, and then also $2 more, thank you so much, and Tombstone Tunes and Knickknack for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support, and it really does mean a lot. Alright, let's get to the build. So, what we want to do is talk about what this character actually gets and what we don't get, because we need to plan out our character build given the restrictions that we're laboring under. We get a few things that a lot of characters actually want. We get weapon and armor proficiencies in every weapon and every kind of armor if we take our classes in the right order. We get pretty excellent skill access because not only can we choose any character to start with, and we can start with one that gives us the skills we want, Bard, Ranger, and Rogue all give us additional skills when we select them, so we can expand our skill access over the course of the game. We get access to a wide array of cantrips, so we'll have basically every utility spell, and we get 6th level spell casting by the end of the game, because we will be taking one level of all 5 full casters, and then one level of Ranger and one level of Paladin, adding up to 6th level spell casting, which combined with Wizard giving us access to any spell we can learn from a scroll, means we can cast up to 3rd level spells. 3rd level spells, conveniently, are the strongest spells in the game, so if we can get reasonable spell access, we can stay pretty relevant as a result of that. Now, what do we not get? We don't get any feats, so our attributes are going to stay terrible, and our overall ability to improve the character over the course of the game is significantly impacted, because we never hit 4 levels in any single class, obviously, so we are never going to be able to get a feat, and we can't improve our attributes at all, especially because given that this character is going to mostly want to stick to utility spells for that reason, we're going to be probably putting the story events that increase your attribute points into other characters. We can mitigate that somewhat with gear, especially because there's a piece of gear that most other party members will never be competing for that can help bump up our casting abilities, the Circlet of Intelligence, so we can use that to get wizard spells and gain back some of the attribute points that we're losing, but that is a real penalty. We also, of course, never get access to higher level than 3rd level spells, and we are stuck with a few dead levels for classes that don't get a lot at 1st level and are giving us not much when we actually get to them. When you put it all together, this character ends up with a lot of utility functions, great defensive abilities, both for yourself and your party, and can be an excellent skill monkey. In other words, a jack of all trades. So we actually get to fulfill the fantasy that you want going into this character build, if such is your fantasy, of having access to a lot of different skills and using them well. Jack of all trades and master of none, but we will never, of course, be as powerful powerful as a character that is more specialized. We also are laboring under a significant restriction for honor mode. We have to take Paladin last. The reason for this is that if you break your oath, then the game counts that as switching your class. So we are forced to either never break our oath, which is very easy to do accidentally throughout the course of the game. If you have Paladin levels throughout the entire game, a single misclick on the wrong NPC can cost you your Paladin oath, or take Paladin as our 12th level in order to get the achievement at level 12. For safety, that means we're going to grab Paladin as our last class level, because then we will never risk losing it by virtue of accidentally breaking our oath, which the game counts as changing your class. So those are our restrictions. Let's start building. So first off, you can see I'm using the Duergar Hireling as the example character here, and that is because I think that Duergar makes this much easier than any other race pick. Duergar's infinite out-of-combat invisibility starting at level 5 means that you will at the point where this build really starts to fall off relative to other builds, because up to level 5 we're actually a totally reasonable character. It's only after level 5 that we start to lose some power level as we level up. At that point you become permanently invisible. That means that enemies can't hit you. You get to start all fights from perfect positioning, because you get to be invisible entering fights, and you can place yourself in very defensive locations in order to provide the support that your allies need, because you can stay invisible until the point where you need to actually engage in the combat and enter to give your ally a buff or a defensive option or something along those lines. That gives you a lot more utility and positioning ability in terms of how you are going to actually play your character, so I highly recommend playing Duergar for this character. If you don't want to, then the standard high power races are always good. Just Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed will allow you to position more easily. Githyanki for the Misty Step and the Astral Knowledge can be incredible. This character will be a skill monkey, so Githyanki sort of doubles down on that by giving you access to all of the skills, and so you're able to be more jack-of-all-tradesy by having more skill access, or Halfling to reroll ones, because we'll be maintaining concentration on haste a lot of the time, so maintaining concentration more easily because of being a Halfling will give us a lot of additional power. For what character class we start our character with, we have a couple things that we need to take into account. The first level that we take is going to be the most important, because that's going to set what skill access we have, what our save proficiencies are, and also give us a lot of our utility for the early game. We want to have as many skills as possible, and we want Constitution save proficiency, but we also want weapon and armor proficiencies in the early game. These things all together mean that there are really 3 options for starting character class. Fighter, Sorcerer, and Barbarian all get Constitution save proficiency. Given that we want weapon and armor proficiencies, if we wanted to take Barbarian, we would just take Fighter. But Sorcerer has a couple significant advantages as a starting class that make me lean towards starting as a Sorcerer. We get Con save proficiency, but we also get dialogue skills, and this character's early game utility for the party is in part going to be the power of being a party face, which every party needs, and this character can fulfill actually quite excellently. And so having the skill access to those dialogue skills early is going to be a pretty big boost to the character. We also get to maximize our caster level. Because we're taking a level of full caster, we can raise our caster level as quickly as possible to reach high-level spells, and not start giving up spell access until later in the build if we start with mostly casters. So starting with Sorcerer gets us the most possible things that we can get. We also know that we are going to end up taking Paladin as our last class. What that means is, thanks to a quirk of how Baldur's Gate calculates save DCs and stuff for items, is that our caster class for items will always be Charisma. Now, this character won't have enough Charisma to be your item user, your scroll, or like Markaheshki or item user anyways, but that is something that's relevant, and so we probably want to have high Charisma regardless in order to be able to land the occasional scroll, or something along those lines, if we happen to need to in the late game. So starting with Sorcerer gives us all of those options, as well as a bunch of extra power for the early game. We're going to take as our attribute spread a pretty rare one for me, but we are going to take 14 charisma because that gives us decent dialogue skills and is enough to give us reasonable accuracy with our cantrips and stuff in the early game. 16 dexterity, 16 constitution, and 12 wisdom. We don't need any intelligence, even though we'll need it to prepare wizard spells, because the circlet of intelligence will give us 17, so we'll just have enough wizard spells prepared regardless. And this way we can have 16 dexterity. One thing that this character will never get is the alert feat or additional dexterity, so having high dex can really help you go first in combat, which is very important. For our subclass, we're going to take Storm Sorcery, because this makes us much more evasive. Now, whenever we cast a spell, we can leave, which is very important for a character like this one that will want to reposition frequently. And for our spell selection, we're going to take what will be our main combat spell throughout most of the early game, Magic Missile, and we're going to take Shield. Shield gives us a great defensive reaction, and Magic Missile doesn't care about our charisma at all, does excellent damage, can finish off low health enemies, and so on, and will scale pretty well as we increase our spell slot level. So having Magic Missile is going to be what this character uses to do damage when we want to do damage. For our cantrips, we're going to start with Friends, because this is part of what makes us an excellent party face, and then we're just going to grab utility cantrips. For the early game, though, I do recommend picking up Ray of Frost. We can still hit with it with 14 charisma in the early game, and Ray of Frost will let us freeze puddles and stuff, which can be very useful even on into the quite late game, but for the most part, we're just going to grab utility cantrips and Friends so that we can have we can be an excellent party face. For our skill selection here, we're going to grab as many dialogue skills as we can pick up, including, of course, Persuasion. And this character starts with Deception and Sleight of Hand. This is a great background to pick, because Sleight of Hand proficiency will be really nice for this character as well. With 16 dex, we can be very good at our Sleight of Hand checks. But we can also pick up Sleight of Hand later on, and we will do that in order to be able to be a utility character for the party. That's level 1, let's move on to level 2. At level 2, we obviously have to take a different class level, and I want to take another caster level so that we can maximize our caster level as soon as possible. I think that the natural choice and the obvious choice here is to take Cleric. This will get us weapon and armor proficiencies immediately, as well as very powerful Cleric boosts, and some excellent utility spells, including Guidance, which can make us better at skill checks, as well as things like Healing Word and Sanctuary, which make us significantly better at helping our party out. So, Cleric. The question here mostly is, which subdomain do we take? If we take a domain like Light, Tempest, War, or Nature, we get heavy armor proficiency immediately, but with 16 dexterity, we actually don't need heavy armor proficiency right now, so I think that the best domain to pick is going to be Light domain. This gets us Warding Flare, which combined with our 16 dexterity, medium armor proficiency, and shield proficiency, will make us as well as the shield spell, will make us incredibly hard to actually hurt. So this character will be excellent at absorbing attacks from enemies, thanks to our great defensive reactions. When you have both shield and warding flare on the same character, by the way, the thing that you want to do is use Warding Flare if the enemy hits you on a high roll, and use Shield if they hit you on a low roll, because Shield will always work, Warding Flare will only work if the disadvantage actually stops them from hitting you. So if they're fairly likely to hit you on the second roll, just use Shield. If they are unlikely to, use Warding Flare. Then we also get, we get 2 prepared spells. Unfortunately only 2 because we have 12 wisdom, but that's plenty because that will allow us to pick up Bless, which gives us an excellent supporting option for our party, and Sanctuary. Sanctuary's great because it's a bonus action, it can help defend us, and it will be very important to self-cast later when we're concentrating on haste. We'll be able to pick up Healing Word from our Bard levels later on, so we don't need to prepare that from our Cleric levels, though you can just for level 2 stuff. But having Bless that you can concentrate on in the early game means that you have actually a lot of utility for your party already, and are also very hard to hurt. For our cantrip selection, we're going to grab utility cantrips like Guidance, Resistance, and Thaumaturgy. These are unique to... These are relatively unique to clerics, and so picking those up early gives us access to a lot of additional utility cantrips, which is great. And other than that, no decisions to make, so let's go to level 3. At level 3, of course, we need to take yet another class, and we are going to continue to take caster classes because it's very important that we level up our casting skills. Now, at this point in the game, you have a choice to make, and that is, do you want to try to get the Warped Headband of Intellect at level 3, and then take Wizard, so you can immediately start preparing and casting level 2 Wizard spells, or do you want to save that fight for level 4? On Honor Mode, with a character like this one that is a bit of a cross to bear for the party, that's dragging the party's average power level down a little bit, I'm going to suggest saving the Ogre fight for level 4 most of the time and taking Bard. But if you're feeling confident that you can take the Ogre fight and get the Warped Headband of Intellect, you can pick up Wizard, so you can immediately start going for level 2 Wizard spells. Bard gives us a lot of things, but most importantly, it gives us some extra skill access, as well as some additional cantrips that are very nice for us. We already have Light, so we're going to pick up Dancing Lights and True Strike as the only cantrips here that we don't yet know. Obviously, Vicious Mockery isn't going to do anything because if we want to use a charisma-based combat cantrip, we already have Ray of Frost, which is better, so we're not going to use Vicious Mockery on this character. But we also get a lot of excellent utility spells that really go in line with our character being a party face and having a ton of use for our party. We can take Disguise Self and Speak with Animals so that we just always know those, and we can take Healing Word to protect our party. We can also pick up Long Strider. We could prepare this from our Druid level as well, but I think grabbing it here is pretty nice because this gets you Long Strider early, and you'll always have access to it. There's also not really that much else that we want from our Bard levels at this point, so having all of these utility spells that make you a better party face means that this character is quite excellent at dialogue skills at this point. We also get to add in another skill, and that can be anything. Sleight of Hand, if you don't have it yet, is what I would pick up. We could finish out our last Conversation skill, or you could pick up some of the other skills from this level that you might need from the Wisdom skill set or the Intelligence skill set that you might need for dialogue skills. The one that comes up most often in dialogue checks is Arcana, so if you just want one intelligence skill, you can pick up Arcana. We could also pick up Perception because we can do that for the party pretty well, so I will recommend that. Other than that, no decisions to make for our Bard level, so let's move on to level 4. And here we're going to grab Wizard because we can now pick up the Warped Headband of Intellect, setting our Intelligence to 17. This will let us learn and prepare up to level 2 Wizard spells. The ones that you're looking for here, because we've been mostly using Magic Missile as our combat spell of choice up to this point, the one you're looking for here is Cloud of Daggers and Flaming Sphere. Neither of those care about your stats at all, and will remain very useful for the rest of the game. At this level, though, with the Warped Headband and 16 Intelligence, you are actually as good at Wizard casting as a normal Wizard would be, or almost as good. So you can still just prepare and cast spells as though you were a normal Wizard at this point. But the ones that you will really want in the late game are ones that don't have save DCs, but still help you contribute in combat, and Cloud of Daggers and Flaming Sphere are excellent for that, because the one is a summon that will distract enemies, and the other is guaranteed damage that doesn't care about your stats at all, and will remain incredible damage all the way into the very late game. If you can lock an enemy inside a Cloud of Daggers, they'll take consistent, relatively high damage, no matter what your stats are, so it's very helpful for this character's combat strategy. We get some more cantrips, and so we can continue to fill out our collection, picking up Blade Ward, which we don't have yet, and then a couple other combat spells. Firebolt is useful just to be able to light fires, and then finally we can take Acid Splash, which you can use to open boxes. This is actually a pretty useful... One of the only good uses for Acid Splash is to open large amounts of crates at once, but it actually saves you a lot of clicks. So this character is in fact very helpful in that way as well. We're grabbing utility spells from our Wizard level here, but this will depend, of course, a little bit on what you have found, but you could pick up Find Familiar, Featherfall. You can take False Life, which this character can actually spend a spell slot on. It's not horrible. I wouldn't recommend it every time, but it does do something. Expeditious Retreat can give you a retreat option, but we'll pick up Enhanced Sleep. Mostly you're just looking for utility, and Fog Cloud, which is another great combat option, is mandatory for this character as well. Mostly you're looking for utility options that don't have attack rolls or spell save DCs. At this point, some of your spells will be a little redundant with ones you've picked up from other classes, but the main ones that you're going to be using at this point are utility spells, Featherfall, Enhanced Sleep, and Longstrider, which are all ritual spells and don't cost you spell slots, and for combat, Magic Missile, Cloud of Daggers, and Flaming Sphere if you have found a scroll to learn it. Finally, we can pick up Grease. The Grease surface can still be set on fire, which will help you set large fire surfaces, which can actually be relevant damage even on into the late game. Grease on top of a torch is just a ready-made fire surface to dip weapons in and give enemies a little bit of extra burn damage every turn, so even despite the save DC not being super high on it, it can still be quite useful on all the way into the late game. There's also at least one piece of machinery that you can hit with Grease in order to make it work better, which is a really cool story touch that I was very excited by when I first discovered it, and so having Grease is pretty nice to be able to do that as well. At level 5, we are going to take our last of the full casting classes by picking up our level of Druid. This gets us 3rd level spell slots, which is awesome. So you can see because we have 5 full caster levels, we get 3rd level spell slots, which will allow us to learn and cast Haste. Haste is going to be what this character does for a lot of their combats for the rest of the game, because you can concentrate on Haste to give another character an extra action, and that's basically like turning this character into a fully fledged other party member. With Haste and Sanctuary on the same character, you can do it extremely safely, and because you'll always be you can be invisible thanks to the Dwergar cantrip Invisibility, you gain the positioning tools to be able to do that from anywhere on the battlefield. That kind of utility is actually very helpful all through the game, so you get a lot of power out of this character just by having access to and using 3rd level spells. For our cantrip selection here, it doesn't really matter. You can pick up Thorn Whip and Shillelagh just to have them, although obviously your wisdom won't be high enough to use them, but we've got the cantrips that we're using currently. And then for our prepared spells from our Druid level, we can pick up Goodberry and we can pick up Create or Destroy Water. That's a decent number of those are some extra utility spells that this character hasn't been able to pick up yet, and so that just gives you yet another tool to aid the rest of your party. This character also makes a great Create Water caster because you don't have a lot of damaging uses for your spell slots, but Create Water is really good to be able to double the lightning damage of a party member, so if you need Create Water in your party, this character is an excellent one to do it, because you don't have a lot else to do, so might as well do things that help out your party. That's the support character that we are building. Now, we've hit level 3 spellcasting, and so at this point we have to decide where we're going next. There's a lot of different options that we can take here, and the one that I'm going to suggest is that we pick up Rogue. Rogue gives us some skill access. Rogue gives us skill access and 2 skill expertises, which are really important at this stage in the game because our ability to be a party face is starting to fall behind. Other charisma-based characters by this point in the game will have 18 charisma, so we are 2 behind in terms of our skill checks compared to other charisma-based characters, and other dexterity-based sleight of hand users will have 18 dexterity, so we're 1 behind in that case. However, we can pick up expertise in both persuasion and sleight of hand, and keep our party face and sleight of hand checks competitive with with any other character by virtue of taking Rogue here. So I think that gives us the most utility for our party. And then finally, for our last skill, we can pick up pretty much anything. You can just fill out the remainder of your conversation skills, or you can take investigation or stealth if you feel like you want to make stealth checks from invisibility. Any of those options are pretty nice, but this character will mostly be being a party face at this point, so having all 4 charisma skills is pretty helpful. At the next level, we are going to take Fighter. Fighter gives us a healing option. Second Wind is pretty nice, and this character will, at this point, start having... While we have relatively low hit points, because we've taken a lot of casting levels, we have quite solid armor class and a lot of defensive tools. So this character can be a pretty reasonable defensive character, a reasonable tank, tying up enemies and stopping them from doing stuff. Fighter also gets us martial weapon proficiency, which isn't super important. We're not making weapon attacks with this character, but does let us carry a couple weapons with passive benefits that can help the character. And for our gear selection, of course, we're mostly looking for things that buff our party or give us additional passive benefits. Most importantly, though, Fighter gives us access to a fighting style, and the fighting style that we can take actually gives us a lot of additional utility to our party because we can take Protection. I think that Protection fighting style is quite underrated because people typically want builds that are focused purely on damage, but no resource disadvantage on an attack is massive. You can see that from how powerful Light Cleric is, and the ability to do this for any ally is incredible. Protection fighting style, I think, is quite heavily underrated. It's basically the level 6 Light Cleric feature, which is one of the best class features in the game, and so being able to pick that up means if enemies target us, we have Warding Flare, we have Shield, we have a lot of defensive utility. If enemies target our allies, we have a lot of defensive utility, and we can be constantly passing out healing words, hastes, and blesses, giving our party the boosts that they need to overcome the fact that this party member is not doing an awful lot of damage. Protection fighting style is really good for us, and I think generally speaking underrated in Baldur's Gate 3 builds, and is something that this character will benefit a lot from. Next level, honestly, this is where things start to go downhill. We've stopped getting new caster levels. We will get one more, but we won't get additional from taking one level of Ranger and one level of Paladin. But we won't get additional spell access because of it. We're still going to be capped at 3rd level spell slots. Barbarian doesn't give us a lot other than hit points. Ranger gives us a few utility options. Warlock gives us a few utility options, and Monk gives us almost nothing. So there's a few levels that are going to be a little bit painful because we've already maximized this character's power early. Now that's good. You want your character to come online as fast as possible, but these next few levels are going to be a little bit disappointing where we're not gaining a lot of power level. However, we are gaining a decent amount of hit points as we level up, which does help a lot in terms of how survivable this character is as a tank and distraction character for our party. I'm going to recommend that we take Ranger next because we can take Ranger Knight and gain access to heavy armor. While we are great at using medium armor, in the late game with 16 dexterity, heavy armor is going to be better armor class for us, so picking up Ranger Knight at this point means we will be able to use any of the excellent late game heavy armor suits, as well as like Grimm's helmet, which is a heavy armor helmet. So this just gives us a lot more options in terms of gearing. We will then also not be competing for the really powerful late game medium armors that an archer character or something like that might be in our party would want, because we'll have heavy armor proficiency. We also get to pick up a Natural Explorer boost, which gives us Wasteland Wanderer for fire. This is still probably the best pick, even though we're getting it late, although there's a little less fire damage later than there is early, but resistance to fire damage will still come up pretty frequently. And we get an additional skill check, and an additional skill, and we can pick up Stealth if we didn't have it yet, or any of these other skills that we don't yet have access to. And because we took Ranger Knight, we also get History as a skill proficiency, which works well with our 17 intelligence thanks to the circlet to let us pass some history checks as well. There's a few of them that come up in Act 3 that it's nice to be able to pass. Next up, we are going to pick up Barbarian just for the hit points. I think that is slightly more valuable than picking up Monk or Warlock at this point. Warlock really doesn't give us a lot, so we are going to just grab our hit points from Barbarian. And then we will take the utility of Warlock, because we do get a couple extra cantrips. Obviously, we already know Blade Ward. Eldritch Blast doesn't do much because we only have 14 Charisma, but we can just pick it up anyways. It's useful for breaking boxes, if nothing else. And then for our subclass selection here, The Mortal Reminder doesn't do very much because we aren't going to be attacking that frequently. But with 3 shots from Eldritch Blasts, even if they miss, you can still get some critical hits off of Mortal Reminder, which is pretty nice. And neither Archfey nor Fiend give you anything, so we're going to pick up a Great Old One. And then we are going to take Armor of Agathis. This is another way to spend a spell slot on something that does do something at the very least. And then for our utility slot here, we can pick up Hex in case we want to fire off Eldritch Blast shots. This could do an extra d6 on any critical hits that we might get. But honestly, our Warlock spells aren't going to matter that much. We're going to spend our spell slot on Magic Missile most of the time anyways. You can also pick up Hellish Rebuke because it does do a reasonable amount of damage on a reaction, which we can use, but our reactions will mostly be being used defensively, so our last Warlock spell really doesn't matter. Take whatever you want for flavor. Finally, we pick up Monk, which gives us almost nothing, because none of the Monk features are useful. We have heavy armor, so unarmored defense doesn't do anything. Dexterous attacks could have been useful if we'd gotten it quite early, but at this point in the game, our dexterity won't be high enough to make use of it, and we don't have extra attack. So our weapon attacks are never going to be that useful, and neither of the other 2 abilities come up for us because we just aren't attacking. So we just saved the Monk level for last, because it gives us the least bonuses. Or second last, because of course we have to take Paladin last, Paladin being required to take last, since if you break your oath, then this whole thing becomes useless. For our Paladin Oath, we are going to take Oath of the Ancient, because Healing Radiance can actually be pretty useful for this character, even in the extreme late game. By this point, if you have another character with the buff on heal items, you will have probably moved them off in favor of the Radiating Orb items. So, like, if you have just a monoclass cleric who was using the buff on heal items early. So those can go to this character, and Healing Radiance can actually be very useful to pass out Blesses and Blade Wards for this character. It gives us more than Oath of Devotion or Oath of Vengeance would, so Oath of the Ancients is the best pick here for sure, and is actually a pretty reasonable boost to this character. In my original guide for Tactician mode, I recommended taking Paladin at level 1, because Healing Radiance is actually really nice for this character build, but for Honor mode, of course, we have to take it last. That still makes it powerful. Now, at this point, of course, you can respec out of this build, but why not just win the game with it, and so Healing Radiance will help you do that. Alright, having gone through that, we now have 1 level of every class, and have gotten the Jack of all Trades achievement, but let's talk about gear, because there are some items that are pretty important for this character in order to function as the Jack of all Trades support character that it is. For items for this character, there's really 2 items, or one item and a couple scrolls that you absolutely have to have in order to make this character function, and then a few other items that are highly recommended. The first item is the Warped Headband of Intellect, and the great thing about this is almost no other character actually wants the Warped Headband, so you won't be stealing this from a party member, you won't be competing with your party in order to pick up this item, but you get 17 Intelligence, which allows you to prepare and cast up to 4 wizard spells, 1 from having 1 wizard level, and 3 from your +3 intelligence bonus, which is very important for this character. Then you want some wizard spells that are going to be good. So I recommend finding the following scrolls as a very high priority. A scroll of Cloud of Daggers, scroll of Misty Step, and a scroll of Haste. Cloud of Daggers, Bless, and Haste give you 3 excellent concentration options that you can concentrate on during fights, which will allow your character to actually contribute to combat. And those are some really important spells for your party to have access to, so this character that's not bringing the damage or the control might as well be adding in those spells. Misty Step, of course, is a great escape option for every character, and very important for this character because of our positioning requirements, although slightly redundant with our Storm Sorcerer feature, but still very useful. Next up, we want the best heavy armor that we can pick up that isn't required for another party member. I'm going to recommend the Dwarven Splint Mail, because this will let us maintain concentration on haste more easily, thanks to the additional +2 Constitution, and also give us some extra hit points. 113 hit points in the late game is pretty respectable, and will allow this character to tank a lot of damage that isn't going to more active party members, especially when combined with your reasonably high AC, and defensive options. Next, you're going to want anything that buffs your initiative. Now, obviously, that's very important for other party members, so this is a lower priority. Other party members who don't have access to alert should get that first. This character can still do a lot just defensively, reactively, or only by concentrating, but initiative boosts are good on everybody, and this character is no exception. Finally, two specific items that will help a lot in terms of helping out your party. Falara Louv can cause your party members' stuff to do way more damage with Shriek, or buff their attacks with Melody. And the Staff of Arcane Blessing, if you have an ally who's making spell attack rolls, like a Warlock or Sorcerer or Wizard, can be a huge boost to your party because you're going to be buffing your party with Bless very frequently. The tooltip on the Staff of Arcane Blessing, by the way, is terrible. It's one of the worst tooltips in the entire game. By an additional 1d4 to saving throws and weapon attack rolls, it means exactly the same, not additional at all. It's 1d4, the total Bless buff from this is 1d4 to saves, 1d4 to weapon attacks, and 2d4 to spell attacks. So it's very helpful for Warlocks and Sorcerers, but doesn't improve it for anyone else. Still a very useful buff item for a party that has spell attackers in it. Finally, the Bless on Heal items, Hellrider's Pride, Whispering Promise, and the Boots of Aid and Comfort, can be very useful for this character in the late game, especially because other characters are not going to want these anymore at this point, and you can still get Blade Ward and Bless on your whole party, especially combined with the Staff of Arcane Blessing. That can be a pretty significant buff to your party. Altogether, that gives you an awful lot of utility and makes this character pretty functional for Honor Mode. Again, this is a challenge mode, but I think that this character ends up surprisingly strong, and especially in the early game, where the game is hardest, is actually almost as good as another character would be, and so is going to be totally playable as an Honor Mode playthrough. If you want to give that a try, definitely let me know how it goes. I'm very curious to see what people are able to make happen with one of the hardest challenge modes in Baldur's Gate 3. Alright, my friends, hope you've enjoyed this look at the Honor Mode Jack-of-all-trades build, and of course, as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do so very much, and I do read every comment I get, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.